Okay. The idea in a prosperity paradox that I think is very interesting is most of the innovation in bottom of pyramid. Some of you are familiar with C.K. Prahalad. The treasure at the bottom of the pyramid was a very eye-opening 2004 book that revealed that countries in the lowest levels of economic development can pull up out of poverty through entrepreneurship and innovation. We are all familiar now with what happened with India, what happened with China, what happened with Southeast Asia. Today, those same Vietnamese that fought with the Americans parade with supermarket carts, very proud of having achieved a status of economic developing countries. And basically that Prahalad revealed is the bottom of pyramid is composed by people who earn less than $2 a day. And those people have been promoted out of poverty, not through aid, but through entrepreneurship. In the case of prosperity paradox goes a step forward. It said it's not just innovation isolated, but the kind of innovation that helps connect demand with supply. One example is, which is the most fastest growing market for cell phones in the world? Which continent, you think? This growing market for cell phones?
Nigeria.
Africa, exactly. And the reason is not because African people are more interested than us in texting people, but because they use it to communicate, to sell their crops. If you are carrying something that's perishable, you grew or you hunted or you gather, and you have to go to a market to sell it, you better know that the price you're going to get there is a price you want to or you have to get in order to be able to sustain yourself. And the poverty starts with when you are forced to go to a place where you either sell at the price your buyer tells you or you let it rot. So just a low price cell phone can make all the difference. But what prosperity paradox says is, yes, and the key is not the cell phone. The key is the market the cell phone creates, because it creates a new customer or new buyer that that person can find for its market. Today we have Twitter. Today we have a series of marketing resources that were unaffordable for most of us individually. Well, that's the kind of social lab experiences. I want to show you one example of what they present there. I keep leaving things behind me. Since I left my memory pills home, you will have to bear with me. Let me get... This is something we developed for Argentina. This is the situation. We have a 50,000 people slum, right 2 blocks behind the equivalent to the White House, which in Argentina is pink. There, it's back to back to the highest square feet value property in Buenos Aires, called Puerto Madero. In those 50,000 people live in approximately 32 areas behind the railroad tracks. What is the critical problem is now we are redeveloping the area. We are helping them to stay there, becoming members. But the key problem we face is how can we make them acceptable to get employment or to sell their services to the rest of the city. People are really afraid to go there. If you say, oh, I live in, the place was called Villa 31, now it's called Barrio 31, neighborhood slum. You say Villa 31 and at the end of the conversation, people will say, thank you very much, but I will look for a plumber elsewhere. So how can we do it? Well, what we found out is everybody has a smartphone. Therefore, we created this application that helps neighbors to do several things. First, we communicate the end users, for example, people that basically request, if you live in one of these fancy areas of the city nearby, you may want to get a plumber that is close. So you can look in your cell phone and hire plumber or hire or buy products using the application. And those who offer the services can also join the application and offer their services in the Uber model or Airbnb model, but with a third partner that is the city regulating, because of course you want to make sure that the person who's coming there is not going to rob you and the product is healthy and following the standards. So the application helps people to connect. This is what we call market making innovation. This has helped approximately 5,000 new jobs. These are people who know what to do, live in a former slum, and they basically are looking for customers. And by the way, is inviting neighbors. The neighborhood has been remodeled. There are a lot of work. There is a lot of work going there, but people are still afraid to go there. And they have markets, produce markets. So with this tool, they can see the place and they start coming to the neighborhood. And of course, the city collects metrics, speaking about feedback. So the city is able to find out, okay, what works, what doesn't work, who's doing better, who's not. And there are other applications, but including security. For example, neighbors can check on neighbors. If you are going at night to your place and you hear someone following you and you use the application, your neighbors just turn on the lights. And that deters 80% of the crime. But also the police receives a warning. So that also helps make the neighborhood not only be safer, but feel safer, which is sometimes more important than being actually safer. So this will be an example of market-making innovation. What kind of things we can do in order to help people connect? Okay, we are here as a global network working as a market-making network. So we are trying to help people to look at what they are doing and maybe what does have to do with what we have to do. How can we use the examples of Arizona mega region or the examples of Never Again Rwanda or the examples of market making innovation in projects we are working at? Because a lot of what we today are using, like, for example, cheap phones. Phones used to be, I don't want to say this, but some of you will remember the times where a portable phone was like a brick size thing. Exactly. Actually, my former mother-in-law was 90 and she liked to travel, was the first one to get one of those, and she would carry that in there when she was going in her tours, and we called it a granny phone. Because, yeah, she was calling it, and there was nobody else to call. But you may not have heard, but you probably yes, about Mo Ibrahim. Mo Ibrahim was a guy who was laughed at. He suggested that how if we sell phones in Africa at a lower price? And AT&T laughed at him. So he did. He earned about $5 billion in personal assets, and he created a foundation that gives an award, a yearly award, to countries that have stayed 1 year without corruption. Okay, it's called the Ibrahim Award, and Africa has been a way to promote, to reward good governance in another way, to showcasing not just the negative, which everybody knows, but the positives. Anyway, the idea is creating this market. So with this example in mind, I will invite you to participate in doing a Q&A open to all those here who had presented and all those here who had been listening and thinking about the presentation. So the idea is let's talk about what kind of things would you like to know more, or what kind of things you think are relevant of what you heard with regard to these awards. Yes.
The Never Again Rwanda people. Reconciliation. Tell us a little bit about the differences and the differential impact between what you did in Rwanda and what they did, for instance, in South Africa. You hear me? I would like to know the difference in reconciliation between what you did and achieved in Rwanda and, for instance, what they did and achieved in South Africa.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Roger. Your question is very interesting, but again,
Then I'm sorry.
Yeah, the contexts are a bit different, because the apartheid was the blacks, Africans, had been marginalized and denied the right to land or as citizens. Coming to our case, it was Rwandans against Rwandans, because before the independence or before the colonization, Rwanda had a monarchy. The monarchy were Tutsis. So when the Germans came, of course, they worked more closely with the monarchy, the Tutsis. When the Germans were defeated, Rwanda became a protectorate of Belgians. So the Belgians worked closer with the Tutsis until when they disagreed, and then switched and empowered the so-called majority, who were the Hutus. So for South Africa, they had the Truth, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. For us, where in South Africa they listened to testimonies of the violence of all cases of humanity that happened during the apartheid era. In our case, it's the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission. Because for almost more than 30 years, Rwandans had lost unity. And now, because of the genocide of proximity, there was need for reconciliation. Because a man killed a wife killed her own children because they resembled the Tutsi father. Grandparents failed to hide their grandchildren because they were born to a Tutsi mother. So it was a bit complex bring those people together and forge the unity. But what Rwanda did that contributed to the unity is that after the war, government rehabilitated the society through the solidarity camps. Every citizen had to go to a camp and be taught on the history, the genocide, and why people got disorganized, where they were taught about the colonization. And that was the first step to at least help a society that had been divided. And I think that's where South Africa missed a step, the ANC missed a step. The ANC came to power. Mandela did what he could. He had the government, but they forgot to rehabilitate the blacks who had been marginalized for more than 100 years. And the violence and the xenophobia we are seeing today in South Africa is because the ANC forgot to rehabilitate its own people.
It's very interesting.
One could say that Mandela did was to unite the country. So favoring reconciliation without assuming some difficult issues. What would you say to that?
Yes, of course. If I'm put into Mandela's shoes, I can understand him. But I think it was the responsibility for those, because Mandela was old and he had been in jail for 27 years. But people who were young, like the Mbeki, the Zuma, the Ramaphosa today, and those other senior cadres should have mastered the brains of their master, so that they follow his steps of trying to bring people together. Other cadres, they didn't master the philosophy or the ideology of Mandela.
Just to add a little bit to that is the fact that even if we might have, those positives and negatives about the South Africa's case, we had to learn about the South African case when we were developing our societal healing and participatory governance program, because what we've seen is that reconciliating people or assuming that you have achieved a certain level of reconciliation is not necessarily enough. And the very lessons are actually continuing to come back to Rwanda, because you could, if you go by what we call positive or peaceful coexistence alone, you would say things are fine. And you can say, we have no more work to do. But if you look at the needs, the psychological needs, the psychosocial necessities these people have, the depth of the diversities and the need to create a space where every story has to be told and heard, then you know that you need a certain level of healing, which doesn't necessarily bring you back into the wounds per se, but which consolidates the reconciliation process. And we had to learn about the South Africa's case. We actually did the mapping of actors and initiatives of healing and reconciliation globally before we choose to go by the psychosocial support approach, because you see the healing needs are like very huge. It's like a sea. You don't know where to start. So while looking at these approaches, I still think like the question of Dr. Roger is still relevant even today. We can't just turn back to that. That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah. Of course, for the Rwandan case, I've read the missions, the peace building area. Some of them are very critical when it comes to the Rwandan approach, because peace builders believe that when you want to address conflicts of violence, you bring the warring parties together and they discuss and forge the way forward. But again, these academicians forget that because of the genocidal proximity, how do you bring a man who killed the mother of his own children to sit with his children and they discuss how to forge a way forward? That's why at times building peace, government is key. There's need for the political will so that that peaceful coexistence can take place. Otherwise, it can't work if you say that, okay, let's bring all these warring parties and then they should decide and forge. They will decide to exterminate those who wronged them. So that's where the Rwandan becomes a bit challenging to some key academicians when it comes to both political science and peace building.
Excellent point.
Well, first of all, applaud you for having reached 100,000 people. But if my math is right, there's still 8 million people in Rwanda. So what is your strategy for scaling up what your NGO has done and sustaining that and leveraging that to reach even more people? Because what we experience in the United States after 150 some years is that there's still hatred and racism, and we haven't reached enough people yet. And the other thing that I've experienced in working with a number of nonprofits and NGOs is that the people who are really passionate and work really hard suffer burnout. And unless there is a succession plan and a plan for scaling and leveraging those efforts. So what's your strategy?
Yeah, thanks a lot. When we got the news that we've received this award, so I developed my blood pressure went up. Why? Because it's a challenge. The challenge is, how do we maintain this? What's the sustainability of what we are doing? I said, I would rather prefer to remain a community-based organization, because I'll always be wanting to be where Never Again is. So what we've done ever since, I think after 2016, when we had the initiation to HICD, the Human Institution Capacity Development, a program that was supported by USAID, that introduced us to the International Society for Performance Improvement, is that we 2016. Then in 2017, we decided to have regional offices. So Rwanda has 5 provinces. In all the 5 provinces, we have 5 field offices. So we have staff in those regional offices. And 2, we've created a strong youth volunteering program. We provide meals. If resources allow, we provide a token facilitation transport. But the essence is to train a pool of passionate young people who can continue the activities that NAR is doing. 3, we are also trying to come up with some business development, because 100% of our activities are supported by donors. So there is a fear that maybe sometime donors will have some donor fatigue. So if that donor fatigue happens, are we going to stop this? So we've started designing and coming up with some social enterprise initiatives so that we can see how to support some other activities. 4, we've trained peace actors. They are community facilitators within the spaces and where we have the citizen forums, so that they can continue to own the process. Some of the citizen forum members have created community-based organizations. And 5, we've tried to engage government, because the government has the moral responsibility to make sure that citizens are at peace. So we are not the so-called controversial activists. We try to engage and give them the findings of our research so that they can be able to address the gaps. So the burnout, this is just a personal story. Some few weeks back, I had some issues with my back. I'm used to waking up at around 4 a.m. Then by 6, I leave home, drive the kids to school. Then by 7, I'm in the office. So some 3 weeks back, I had issues with my back, and the doctors requested that I take a sick leave, 2 weeks sick leave, but I couldn't manage. She would always ask me, why are you should be at home? Why are you here? And then I would go sit, walk around the house, but then I feel.
He's workaholic.
But then when I would sleep, instead of waking up at 4, when it comes 6, I would feel like I want to continue sleeping. So after 2 days, I thought there's something wrong. The body is communicating. I'm no longer Joseph of the 2002. So the body is informing me that in your mind, you're young, but physically, you need to know that you can't keep waking up at 4. So that's why you saw him presenting, and that's why I'm with her. so that the day of burnout, there are people to take over.
That's an interesting.
Can I add something on the sustainability part? Thank you. Never again, Rwanda is not working in isolation. We've started kind of a network of peace actors, not even started alone, working with the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, because we are not alone working with so many people who are affected, or those who are still holding on to the trauma. So that peace actors is helping us be able to share all that we've learned, and them sharing as well. But then also something that I found really interesting since I joined about 1.5 years ago is the digital presence. It's helping so much in knowledge management and sharing for people to know some of the research that we have done, some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the challenges that we've encountered, and how much more we want to scale up and also understand the context today that could have been different from 2002 and how we want to keep growing. So some of the things that I wanted to add up is the fact that the peace actors or the network is growing and many other people are joining, and then the aspect of knowledge management.
I have a question for you.
Many important things that you've brought to us. Said something that really got me thinking, that one of the things that Never Again Rwanda is achieving, that people are Rwandans first. America has become hyphenated America, where Marco might be Scotch-Irish American and I might be Lithuanian American, and this is dividing us. What advice would you give us for doing the social integration that I think is absolutely imperative?
Thank you very much. I'm sure Dr. Joseph and Eric would help me on this. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, I have an 8-year-old son who asked me, when I told him about the genocide, we were going to start the commemoration. That was in April. And then he asked me, Mom, am I Hutu or Tutsi? And I'm sure those are questions that many parents have to listen to or even fail to answer. And then for a second, I was like, what do I answer? I mean, what are we? If we are all joining the government in spreading the message of we are all Rwandans, what am I supposed to answer this young boy who will think about it forever? And I told him, you're Rwandan. It's like, before the genocide. Before the genocide, when you started preaching the gospel of we are Rwandans, what was I? What would I have been if I was born before the genocide? Like, you would have been Rwandan. So I'm not saying that is very easy to say, especially as we have young people that we are training to be more critical thinkers. He's going to keep thinking about that. Was I Hutu? Was I Tutsi? Was I Twa? So it's not as easy, but it's out of those deliberate intentions that are done every day to remind Rwandans that, you know what, we are one even before the ethnicities or before anything that we are one, and we're supposed to be building up to what we want.
What I can add is actually that Rwandanness is not something that Never Again Rwanda as an organization would claim itself. It's like a context broadly, because the government is promoting it's in relation to the National Unity and Reconciliation policy to promote the fact that nobody misses an opportunity because of their historical backgrounds. And that's the removal of the mention of ethnic identity in the national ID card. And actually other genocide scholars had mentioned that earlier on, like Gregory Stanton, when he shared his testimony. It's one of the conversation he had with the President Habyarimana a little bit before. And he said, this thing is going to cause genocide. And as he says he could see this really coming. But what do we say as Never Again Rwanda? I think for us, it's not about forgetting that you have this ethnic identity that you carry, because for some people you won't do that. Their historical backgrounds is where they belong. It's part of who they are, and this is absolutely fine. But do you use this to feel superior to others, or do you use this to deny opportunities of education, for instance, to other people, or to really exclude them from the space? And this is what comes out in our spaces for peace, for instance. And actually, the key principle of Never Again Rwanda is diversity. And by diversity, we mean that we can be different, irrespective of our ethnic identities, our historical backgrounds, even our religions and sexual orientations, things which can be debated. But still, we can come together and discuss the issues which we are facing as a country. Because if it's a governance or democracy problem, it's going to affect us. So we are teaching young people not to be misled and politically manipulated, because a politician would say, because I'm a Hutu or because I'm a Tutsi, then I need these young people to align behind me. And that's really not helping. So instead, if we feel Rwandans, that's okay. But if you feel you're a Tutsi, then you're not excluding your, partner because of who they are, and the other way around. This is what I see as a value that should move forward. And the young people that we have at Never Again Rwanda keep asking these questions. And like I said, I think it's high time that the elder people get ready to respond. This is one of the challenges, intergenerational dialogue. This is one of the challenges we have.
Absolutely.
And because we are transferring trauma to these children, and we don't want to follow up on that. And this is really serious. And this is one of the issues that really comes out in our spaces for peace. And we do tell partners, we do tell the government, other peace actors doing the same work and all of that.
We have trouble getting diversity to also include unity. I think
Again, what you were saying, the important role of mothers. One time, Jan and I were working in Peru, and the new president said he has one program, and that is literacy for women. He said, if women read, their children will read, and they'll get educated. And I think what you're saying is that maybe in the home, where this idea of, yes, you have your identity and you have your background, which is important, but also we're together, in our case, as Americans, and we're having a hell of a time getting there now. So I hope we can get more inspired by you.
We have a question here.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. You deal a lot with unity and reconciliation and helping young people, but tell us briefly the threats that genocide deniers are posing to the journey of unity and reconciliation among Rwandans.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's because he comes from the media, so he goes straight to those hard questions. Yeah, one is that the genocide deniers have penetrated the academia.
say that again.
So the genocide deniers have penetrated the academia community. So they are writing, trying to deconstruct the genocide against the Tutsis. Two, they've also become strong in using, now we are in the digital era. Most young people are digital experts. So the information they consume is manipulative. So, and you find that the challenges we still have in Africa is that writing, we are still an oral society. We tell stories. this young generation in IT, digital, they are reading.
Mhm.
So it's a challenge that those who have seen the genocide, some of them are not writing their narratives. So deniers have capitalized on those gaps to try and undermine the genocide against the Tutsi. So it's a challenge, but the reason why we're also doing research is to try and make sure that we document the history, we document what is on the ground, so that the deniers shouldn't monopolize the space for trying to divert the exact story. But also the most unfortunate thing that because genocide calls for responsibility to protect from the international community. That's a commitment that the world had made after the Holocaust. So during the genocide against the Tutsi, the international community never acted. They never lived to the promise. So the genocide deniers have also, because they are politically smart, they've built networks with some members of the international community who failed to live to the commitment of not entertaining any sort of human suffering. So it's a big issue, but we are the civil society, we are trying, but also the government is also trying to make sure that it educates the society. We have a memorial program. We have a history program that tries to make sure that the genocide deniers don't overtake the entire space. So before going to John, there is something that Dr. Roger asked. I think for the American society, there is still hope, but there is need for political hygiene within the American politics, because it's for us as Africans. When Obama became the president, we thought the U.S. has achieved the dream that Martin Luther King had, I think in 1967.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So no one could believe that U.S. could have black president. We thought that dream has been achieved and the society is going to live to that. I think in between, the politicians forgot their constituencies. Mix money and the lack of political hygiene. Political manipulators are going to manipulate the society. What is happening in the US? But you still have the opportunity, because people wake up one morning from Africa, from Asia, from China. I saw people at the immigration who couldn't even speak English, but they had American passports from China. I think because of the green card? Yeah. So I said, and they were Americans. They were passing as if they are VIPs. So if someone who can't even communicate in English becomes an American, so you still have the opportunity to bring the society together, so that it doesn't erode from the principles of the great fathers that founded this nation. So that's why I was saying that there's a need for the communities within the American states to try and re-educate the young people wisely, to make sure that there is the leaders, the senators, the members of the Congress, etc. They are politicians with hygiene. Otherwise, if you keep having politicians.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. You've shared with us several of the programs that you have that invite in participants from other countries. And we can imagine the kind of exchange that may occur in those programs. I'm curious as to what results you're seeing as those participants go back to their countries, engage in conversations and programs and things like that. What can you share with us about this cross-pollination and this cross-appropriation across boundaries?
Yeah, I think Professor Teresa will help me to, because she has been with us for the last 10 years. When she first came to Rwanda, trying to bring students to learn about the genocide and the post-genocide reconstruction. When we started the Peace Building Institute was to build a network of peace ambassadors globally, because we believe that genocide happened because the international community failed to intervene on time. So we thought to make sure that genocide doesn't happen again, we need to empower young people. Because the West or the North, the people who make decisions in these international systems, so we said let's empower the youth from the West or the North, whatever it is, so that they can be peace conscious and understand conflict. And that's why in the summer we bring almost 10, 15, 20 students to Rwanda so that they can be able to understand the genocide and how Rwanda recovered. We've seen some of our participants becoming interns for some senators and congressmen. We have also some previous alumni. One lady was an assistant to Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of UK. I think she worked in his office. And when we had issues in the Great Lakes region, us asking what is happening in the DRC. Is being accused of interfering. Share with her that the independence, or maybe before the Berlin Conference, we had no borders. But when borders came, there are some Rwandans who found themselves in the DRC. When the killers went there, they exported the genocide ideology. And Congolese of Rwandese origin were forced to leave, and they are now refugees in Rwanda. So some of the benefits or the impact that we've started having some peace building institute alumni in some decision-making offices, whereby if there are any issues occurring around the continent, we have people to share, and then they can be able to share that information to those who can be able to save the humankind. Because I don't know if...
While you were asking that question, all these students who are alumni now were going through my head. It's life-changing. I mean, they come back with a very different view of the world. It opens their mind up internationally. I have one that got a master's in human rights at UConn, and I have a few that become Peace Corps volunteers and then gone on and used that in that experience. A couple that want to become immigration lawyers. So there's it's definitely a long-term impact in a very positive way. Just to follow up on what the doctor said, that when I first came here, I came to see what I could do to help, and it was the opposite. I bring so much of what I learned from working with Never Again back into the classroom. And so it's not just the students who participate in the Peace Building Institute, it really reverberates and fans out.
Just quickly, the other result is very related to what John and I actually discussed a little bit before the meeting started. Is that even the intercultural dialogue capacity that you learn. Personally, I benefited from a number of intercultural exchange with the Americans, for instance. First in 2014, when I came here to and many other states, and we discussed with the American students and the American professionals visiting NGOs. First of all, it would be very hard for me to understand how an NGO actually questions the Congress or questions the president, coming from my own country. So it's also understanding how other people are doing things. And I believe even the time these students spend with the Rwandans will make a difference if they have to decide in places like the UN or the other debate which was going on as the genocide was taking place in the 1994 here in the Congress. And that was one of the actually the reasons why we decided to start that program, that probably we can have young people who think outside of their own shoes, who get out of the comfort zones and leave the situations in other countries like the Rwandan case. So we really see a huge difference in those who attend in terms of even intercultural dialogue.
Yeah, another thing is that, of course, genocide creates trauma, and then the society ends up censoring itself. So I think you've heard that it's debatable that I somehow disagree that there's no freedom of expression back home. I think the media person can tell us what he thinks. Mm-hmm. But I tell the media that it's people have censored themselves. The trauma and the past. And the program we have with USAID is to empower young people to stand up for their rights. When we have these programs where we have youth from US, UK, and all Western countries, we've seen some young people getting shocked, the Rwandan, how Americans ask or even criticize their president. They said, no, our president is stupid. I said, what? How can you say that? No, it is my right. Those people, we vote them. Sure. So there is something that the Rwandan youth learn from their peers from the Western world, because across Africa there are some people who think that own these rights X, Y, Z. So we've seen that these programs provide an opportunity to our young people to understand that they can do this and this is their right. I think another example is in across Africa it was a bit hard. Some governments were trying to criminalize the gay and the lesbians. Some of our programs we've been bringing all youth, irrespective of their sex orientations, giving them space and telling them that no, talk and say who you are, and so that we've seen young people appreciating their peers from with different sex orientations. And some of the young people from the West who would come, some of our programs, some of them were either gays or lesbians. So when the Rwandan youth would hear that, because Africans, we've been eroded by, when are you getting married? If you're a woman above 18 years, guys will ask you that, when are you going to get married? Should I find a man, etc. So, but when they came to learn that, so and so is not straight, they're shocked, but after some time, we've seen them appreciating that diversity. That's an impact to the youth coming from the West, but even our own youth come to appreciate the inclusivity and the cultural diversity.
I was thinking about making a question related to the Sonora, Arizona, and we have here a representative of Arizona and a representative of Sonora. My question was, because of what you were talking about, the situation of neighborness and integrating people, and the fact that for different reasons, in the case of US and Mexico, what are in fact, my question to both of you would be, from the standpoint of Arizona and from the standpoint of Sonora, what would be good to do in terms of facilitating, in terms of work culture, the understanding with the other side? What things Sonorans could get better at that will help them to work better with Arizonans, and what things would help Arizonans to work better with Mexico? You see what I mean? It's like, okay, if I were you, which is an interesting proposition always, because I live on this side, I would tell you, okay, like, for example, Joseph was giving the example of the things Americans take for granted, or maybe do not do the right thing to start. So what things, for example, you would think would be good for Sonorans to get better at doing business with the US and with Arizona in particular, in your experience? As I know you're a businessman also. So.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm frequently asked about language, particularly by small Arizona companies. And what I tell Arizona companies is that I think it's more important to be bicultural with Mexico than bilingual. Mm-hmm. I find that most business people in Mexico that would be interacting with Arizona companies are good English speakers. And increasingly, Arizona companies are becoming better speakers. But I still think that there are some cultural gaps. And I don't think it's a matter of filling the gaps. I think it's more a matter of appreciating the gaps. So, I also tell Arizona companies that in dealing with Mexico and opportunities in Mexico, they need to practice a sort of persistent patience. you know, it's a fine line. You know, it's not like going and selling your product to Sweden. I'm just sort of being somewhat exaggerative here, where, you know, you've got the product, you've got the price, you can deliver the time they want you to deliver it. Maybe you haven't even met in person, but got the goods, they need the goods, the price is right, the sale's made. With Mexico, it remains a process, and you know, companies need to go down twice, thrice before perhaps even talking serious business. So that means for an American company, the ability to actually be able to make an investment in that process. And that investment is an investment of patience, an investment of time, and also an investment in resources.
Interestingly, if we talk about investment, do you see a return on that investment if you do it?
If you do it, that's a huge if.
But when you do it, for those who, you know, take the time, the patience to go the Mexican way, let's put it that way, is that to repeated business, or?
I think it does if the business is being done with, if it's B2B.
Oh, okay.
One of the challenges with Mexico is, I know you see this in the U.S., but much less in the U.S. The sort of wholesale changes at election time.
Okay.
And, you know, all the decision makers that you may have been interacting with for X number of years are completely out of the picture. So there's that bit of a lack of continuity on the government side that I think is perhaps more striking than on the U.S. side after an election.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Gonzalo.
I will take the place of Natalia. No, I totally agree with Kevin. I will respond in three different aspects. And the first aspect is the cultural aspect. As a Mexicans, that's something that is important to know, that we are in an environment, we are like influenced very, very hardly by a way of being, and we have like all the media, and we have a lot of things that are around information and opinions. That is one element. The second element is related with what is happening here with the mega region. So it is being created a culture of the desert. So right now, the cultural part is not as important because I'm different. I am different. Right now, a very interesting company, MCOR, is the name, has just gone to Guadalajara. It's a information technology company, and is the one that is designing and developing. So they are really conquering the market, just like the meat, because they have a different culture. So, in fact, it's a very interesting example with the people that are from Maquilas Tetacawi, that are operating in Tucson and Phoenix. That's a 14,000 people company that are and they are doing business together. So this has become a platform, a very interesting platform. So with this, what I'm saying is that a third aspect is being generated, and the third aspect is how are you going to the world and not just being affected by the world. Because right now it's not a matter of fighting against everybody because everybody is hitting me. But how am I going to be competitive enough to, yes, the other sell me, but I can also sell them. And how am I going to adjust in order to take an advantage of this platform? So right now I see a very optimistic scenario. What the case of Rwanda is for us is the lesson that we learn, because we have a very important theme about security and all the drug things in that. And right now, in order to overcome all that, we also require some of social work there. So I feel that this project that it has been led by the governors is special, because they have been able to overcome specificity and bet for a common vision and a common goals. So I see that we have a lot of work to do, but also we have much more opportunities.
Yes, Roger.
Hitchhiking off of what Margot said earlier, I think it's much easier to raise a child than to fix a broken adult. and I remember, from the South Pacific, the song, "You Have to Be Carefully Taught." And I think while we are attacking problems of racism and hatred at the adult level, we have to get back to the basis of where does it come from in the beginning. And we really have to start in the home, often in broken homes, where the role models are antithetical to peace and recognition. I have a question for Gonzalo. I remember when you were rector of the Sonora Institute of Technology, sitting in your office. It was your old office, and you were talking to us, I don't know whether you were there or not, about ecosystems. And you were identifying the ecosystem that existed. I think you took it even up to Utah, came down to Arizona and Sonora. And I'm just wondering how this concept and dream that you had actually has eventuated into this wonderful, wonderful Arizona-Sonora partnership.
Well, yes. Well, the thing is, why? The question why that idea came to my mind. The idea came to.
And I will add a challenge in a nutshell. In a nutshell.
In
a nutshell.
Briefly, very specific. Okay. Being very specific, yes, to say I had experience in Europe with a group named Columbus. It's 55 universities of Latin America and Europe. And then we thought of an idea, and we created a forum. It's what's called the Euro-Latin American Forum of Innovation. And there were created 8 regions in Europe and in America, in Latin America, and of research and development and training in order to enhance specific areas and projects there were like 8, and not all were in every part, but that gave me the idea of, if they can do it in a distance, why cannot we do it in a specific geographical area? So
great.